Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecini. We are presented by The Athletic. Today on the show, Adam Spinella is in the building. It's our typical Sunday evening podcast. And unfortunately for Adam, it probably could have come on a better night because his beloved Boston Celtics no-showed in Game 3. It looked like by the middle of the third quarter, they were about to go into the huddle and give a quick 1-2-3 Cancun breakdown. Oh boy, was that thing a mess. Goodness, what a disaster. We're going to talk about that briefly. Honestly, we're not even going to break down tape tonight. That was such a fundamental ass kicking that I don't even know that it's worth breaking into how Eric Spoelstra dominated Joe Mazzulla again. Like, I don't even think it comes down to that. This is just a fundamental beatdown in so many different ways. Then we're going to do NBA draft news and notes. We're going to really dive into some of these general managers and some of the quotes that they have given post lottery now at this point, discussing what some of their quotes mean, discussing if you can take anything away from what they say, discussing what the plans are for teams like the Hornets, the Blazers, the Magic, the Rockets, teams like that. We're going to try and dive in and understand how some of these things could impact the draft process. In the Rockets case, it will be mostly based off of reporting, and boy, is there a lot of reporting about the Houston Rockets right now. So we're going to dive into all of that after we talk about the Celtics Heat disaster for like 20 minutes at the top. Spins, how are you doing after that? I feel like we have to get a check on you at this point.
Yeah, so about midway through the third quarter, I took off my Marcus Smart t-shirt and went and threw this bad boy on because the vibes were just off, and I didn't know if I was responsible for that. Clearly, through the final quarter and a half, it wasn't me. It was how it has been all series long. And this has been a team that I think when they get punched in the mouth, they only have two responses. One is for a superstar to really carry them, whether that's a Herculean effort from Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, or they just kind of let it happen. And the last couple of games here, we've seen the stars go colder a little bit more. Tonight was not a good night from Tatum or Brown. The Celtics haven't made a shot all series, it seems. And the result of that is just, it looks like really stalled out offense at times. But what we saw tonight is I think it really bleeds over to their defense. Like, they have not played well at the point of attack at any position. When they get scored on, they then try to force it on the offensive end and take really quick ones, and that allows the Heat to go in transition. Like, every run that's a 5-0 run turns into a 7 or a 9-0 run because of shot selection and impatience from guys just trying to fix it and not necessarily trusting the process. So it's been rough. Top to bottom, Miami has been a lot better than the Boston Celtics the last 3 games, and I'm sure we'll talk about and dissect some of the details as for why. But I think belief is the biggest portion of that the Miami Heat truly believe that whatever they're going to do, whatever adjustment they're going to make on the fly, whatever game plan they have, they believe that they're going to execute it, and they believe in the guys that they have on the floor to be able to make plays more than anybody else.
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday with Robbie Calland on the show, just in terms of, I think that there is a real trickle-down effect of the confidence of like Jimmy Butler down to the rest of his dudes, right? Jimmy Butler is the utmost confident guy in the world, and he empowers his teammates in a big way. He is an unselfish playmaker. He will take the tough shots as necessary because, frankly, this team does not have a crazy amount of shot creation on it. But he will take the tough shots, but he also trusts his teammates to knock down shots. Like, he is more than willing to make the smart play, make the great kick out, be the guy that plays this unselfish brand of basketball while still being the number one option. I feel like with the Celtics, there's almost a opposite trickle-down effect. And Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are so good that a lot of the time it does not matter. Jason Tatum is one of the most talented players in the league. Jaylen Brown is one of the top 25 players in the league, something like that. Having two guys that aren't necessarily the best passers and playmakers I think often leads to offensive stagnation. And then on top of it, you pair those guys with like Rob Williams, not a great passer playmaker. Malcolm Brogdon can make passes, but is the epitome of a guy that will like stop and survey the scene, right? Like he's going to catch, he's going to stop. He's never going to go up straight for a shot, it feels like, or he's never going to make just like that ball reversal. He's going to catch and he's going to stop, right? I love Derek White unconditionally, but like I don't know how much confidence Derek White has, it feels like, right? Like you're getting that impression. That's not unfair, right?
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of the Celtics seem shaken with their confidence. I think it's be unfair to pin that just on Derek White right now. And you mentioned, I think Tatum is a good passer. I just think that he's a good passer in the sense of I'm already committed to driving the basketball and I'm drawing two defenders, or I've been on such a heater right now that they're sending two at me and I'll just move the ball around proactively. Like the ball still sticks to Tatum and Brown's hands whenever it organically finds them. And the Miami Heat, whether it's their zone defense and all the different ways that they're changing things, they're more aggressively forcing Jalen to the left. They're playing a great cat and mouse game on the weak side whenever the Celtics get into the lane and throw skip passes or kickouts. Like they're making Boston think. And the ball is slowing down in their offense to the point where they're so much easier to guard. And then it just becomes a shooting contest or a Tatum and Brown one-on-one game. And as we've seen, like, yeah, Boston can score 100 on a night like tonight when some of those guys don't show up. But Miami has been torching them on the other end that it's just not enough to win that game on offense.
What are you seeing from them schematically, Boston on defense? I'll just ask you this first. It still feels like to me that Miami can get whatever mismatch they want at all times, right?
Yes. They're mismatch hunting. They're doing the right things. We saw the first play of the game today. Boston tries to change their starting rotation and go smaller, put Marcus Smart on Kevin Love. Boom, immediate post up with that great decoy action. It was using what Miami did in an out of timeout situation in game 2 against the Celtics. They ran that play where I can't remember who they ran off the corner. I think it was Duncan Robinson, and essentially an exit play along the baseline. Boston were going to switch that action, jumped 2 off ball to Duncan Robinson, and they had a slip for a layup or a dunk immediately. Miami. Same action. This time they used that as a decoy to post up Kevin Love on the opposite block and just go right at Marcus Smart. Like Spoelstra is so prepared to mismatch hunt, and the Miami Heat as a team, A, they space the floor really well. B, Bam Adebayo's been playing out of his mind, so he can be another guy to hunt mismatches and take Jaylen Brown one-on-one at the elbow when Boston wants to go small and try to play that matchup. And C, more than anything, like they've got just, like you said, unselfish stars and guys who aren't going to force the issue. They're fine with Kevin Love playing through that mismatch. They're fine with Bam Adebayo taking guys at the elbow. They could care less if, one of the Martins or Duncan Robinsons of the world gets up 7 shots and a half. That's fine for Jimmy Butler. It doesn't seem, it seems like if that were to happen for the Celtics and Tatum is 3rd on the team in shots and Brown 4th in a half, it seems like they feel like they're out of rhythm and something is wrong with the process. For Miami, the process is working perfectly because it's not about who takes shots. It's about who creates shots.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought that up because I feel like when I watch Miami, it's a team that has like a real plan beyond give the ball to Jason, give the ball to Jalen, create, right? Now, I think that like the epitome of this is Duncan Robinson in a lot of ways, right? Duncan Robinson has spent like a year and a half out of the rotation at times over the course of the last couple of years, right? He comes in, he's ready to go, and they just have full faith in him to take advantage of the opportunities he gets. Like they're good just running him in dribble handoff actions, in screening actions with Bam Adebayo, and they're like, we're good. We're just going to rock. And I think the 3 moments where the like soul just left Boston's body tonight were just the 3 enormous Bam dunks, right? The first one was the lob off of like the dribble handoff actions. They ran like multiple of them back to back with Duncan, and Duncan just throws up this beautiful right-handed lob, and Bam, I don't even know like how he got up as high as he did. he just like caught it with one hand and just like, I don't even tomahawk it, but like it was ridiculous how much power he got on it. The second one came, I think, 3 possessions later. He gets Jalen on a post mismatch. It goes backspin drop step and just power dunks on him. I think Jalen went for like the floppy charge kind of move. And it was just like, no, this shit ain't flying today in the Eastern Conference Finals for these officials. The final one came in the third quarter after they'd actually like kind of tightened it up a little bit. They get it back. I think it was a 14-point lead at this point, something like that. And then they get Strus, and I think it was a ball screen with somebody else, and then Bam came coming from the dunker spot. Strus throws up a beautiful right-handed lob. Bam dunks all over Boston. And it felt like that one particularly was like the circuit breaker.
Yeah.
Because Boston had some momentum. They were coming back a little bit. And then after that one happened, it came right after a Miami bucket and a stop on the other end. As soon as Miami got that big dunk, it felt like it was over. From that moment on, it felt like it was donezo. And it was those dunks, like we talk about momentum, whether or not momentum's a thing, like it felt like those were big momentous like moments that changed the complexion of this game in such a substantial way.
Well, momentum and plays like that, which give momentum to your team, they do exist and they have real weight when the team you're playing against is just trying to find any type of positivity, right? Like this has been such a negative last 72 hours for Celtics fans with games 2 and game 3 here that, they get in that little run. Like Marcus Smart has that great play with the offensive rebound where he wrestles it away and gets an and one to start the third quarter. You're like, okay, maybe the Celtics are waking up a little bit. Every time Miami was ready for some sort of an answer. And that just deflates any type of the momentum that Boston was trying to get. So, Miami they had the right answer at the right time. Haven't said Gabe Vincent's name yet. What an unbelievable game from him. Like he has stepped up to the challenge and quite frankly been the best backcourt player in this entire series thus far. Miami is firing on all cylinders. Tatum and Brown had off nights tonight. The Celtics role players haven't hit shots this entire series. I don't think they're taking the right ones, but they're not making even the wide open ones. It's a mental game all the way down from coaching staff all the way to players and the last guys on the bench when they get in there. It's been a real struggle for the Celtics.
I'm glad you brought up mental game because I've got video of Joe Mazzulla. Shout out NBA TV. Here's what Joe Mazzulla said after the game.
So this seems to be a continuation of the regular season where teams that have been below you in the standings, you guys have had some struggles against that. Is this an issue of just bad habits from the regular season showing themselves at the worst time?
I think it's regardless of the roster. We're playing against a great team. We're a great team. And right now, they have the mentality and we don't. We have to get that back.
They have the mentality and we don't, and we have to get that back. That's not a great look, I don't think, right, Spins?
It's not a great look. It's also not wrong. So
no, it's right.
It's 100% right.
Mazzulla. Yeah. Call it out. Like it is what it is. That's tough, man.
Yeah. I'm still trying to get a read on Mazzulla and how he communicates with this team because, Ime Udoka used to say things like this a year ago, but you also knew he'd be saying them directly to the guys in the locker room, challenging them in certain ways, kind of doing everything tactically or adjustment-wise on his part to try to rally those troops. He was very blunt and direct and stern in those ways. Brad Stevens, much more calculated as a coach in the way that he communicated through the media and did a lot of things behind closed doors. I'm having a tough time trying to figure out how Mazzulla is doing stuff like this because
he's using town quotes.
He is.
Shout out, who's Kawhi taking?
He's been trying the Boston angle a little bit here the last couple of weeks by referencing City's favorite movies, but I don't really know how he relates to this team in certain ways and motivates them in different ways. Like I don't see anything wrong with a player like Al Horford getting onto the, during a timeout, getting into the coach's chair and speaking to the team. I don't think that that's a bad thing. A lot of people out there will probably be saying, why is he doing Missoula's job for him? Like,
but
it's normal.
It can't be
I
Horford,
think
I don't think. That's the thing.
I don't think the issue is if it has to be one of these veterans and players to try to do or say something. And I don't know if you remember hearing maybe a week or so ago, Rasheed Wallace was talking about what it was like playing for Doc Rivers all those years ago.
Yeah.
And very strongly mentioned that Doc wouldn't want to make tons of adjustments. The players would all get together in a huddle as they're walking back out on the court and say, nah, this is what we're actually going to do. And it felt like for a period in the later part of the second quarter, after a timeout, the Celtics kind of just came out and started to double team Jimmy Butler on the catch before he got into any of his moves. And they didn't last with it all night. They would try a couple things and it worked for a possession or two, and then they'd go back to trying to play through the flow of basketball. But it felt like one of those moments where that was just the players saying, we're not going to let him keep doing this. We have to make this adjustment. And it's impossible for us to know from our vantage point whether that's Horford or the veteran players on this team just trying to change things, or if it's Missoula who is proactive about making these changes and it's just not all coming together and sticking consistently enough. But we don't have a good enough feel for Missoula's rapport with the guys in certain ways that makes it really hard to know not necessarily who's at fault here, but who's got the most urgency to push as many buttons as they can to make positive change happen.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that, to be honest. It's just such a weird situation because we think of the Celtics team as like one of those, and I want to move to the Heat now a little bit just because the Heat deserve some flowers here. We think of the Celtics team as like a switchable team, right? They can go 1 through 5, they can switch actions, or they can play super big. We think of them as a super versatile team that can go super small if they need to, go like, Grant Williams, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown at the 3-4-5 if you want to, right? The 3-4-5 or whatever you want to call it. 5-4-3. But it's interesting to me that this team that has this incredible versatility and has all these pieces that we think about is just getting punked by Eric Spoelstra right now in terms of the way he's able to find the mismatches that he needs and in terms of the way this team is able to find the mismatches that they need.
Yep.
And then on top of it, I get that Eric Spoelstra is a great coach, and I think that Miami is doing some really good things to keep guys like Kevin Love, Max Strus, Duncan Robinson out of the primary action. It's insane to me that the Celtics can't consistently get those guys isolated in the way that Miami is getting Jimmy isolated.
Yeah. And
it's a real problem.
Well, and even worse than that is when they do play through isolation, it's completely outside of the 3-point line with Tatum or Brown. Like they're not doing enough to shrink the defense before they take a bounce. When you catch the ball in 15, 16-foot range in that mid-post area, you're one bounce away from the rim. We saw that with the Bam Adebayo dunk in the second quarter. Like you have to be loaded a little bit closer as a help defender when you catch the ball in a 12 to 18-foot range. But every time Tatum or Brown get a catch, it's on the right or the left wing or high in the middle of the floor. They're 20 feet, 25 feet away from the basket. They've got to load into their move with 1 or 2 bounces. It just gives Miami too much time to make up for that. But they're not even mismatch hunting in the ways that would get the worst or weakest player from Miami guarding them in those situations. So the Heat then have to rotate and help. It's been really tough to watch.
No, I agree. Look, I don't want to do the like where do the Celtics go in the offseason thing until they're actually eliminated. Where does the rest of this series go? Because like for me, we're now at the point where these last few games just mean something in terms of like how they build this team, because the last team we saw just get flat out punked and like end up no showing a game like this was Phoenix last year, right? Phoenix in game 7 against the Western Conference or in the Western Conference semifinals against Dallas They go down, I think it was like 35 or 30 at one point in the first half, and like just total no-show the game, right? This wasn't as bad from a singular game perspective as that one. Like the Celtics had this down to like 12 in the second half. Like they clawed a little bit here and there, but by the midpoint of the third quarter, it was curtains. Like it was done. So to me, how you finish this season means something in terms of where you grow and how you grow now.
Yep.
Because you don't want to end up in a circumstance like the Phoenix Suns a year ago, where it felt like this team, a year after losing in the finals, by the way, the Phoenix Suns really did not enter this season with much momentum. They dealt with injuries, obviously, but they end up making this like roster franchise changing, earthquaking move for Kevin Durant. And now this offseason, like everything is on the table. And part of that's like the Matt Ishbia experience where everything's on the table, where he's just gone like total Charlie Kelly fireball or wild card here. Like we have no idea. But like, this kind of no-show a year after making the finals and losing does genuinely and realistically harken back to that Phoenix Suns team and season and where they were in 2021-22. So the Celtics still have a chance to change that perception of how this season ends and to change that internal locker room dynamic that Joe Mazzulla referenced that we played earlier. That's the most important thing for them moving forward now. I don't even know that it's about wins and losses. Like, obviously they want to win this series. They want to win 4 in a row, everything like that. But to me, it all starts with changing the dynamic, changing the confidence level, changing the flow, and finding a way to do that. Because otherwise they run the risk of that Suns timeline continuing across and the Celtics being the next in the line to potentially be that, especially given the free agency situation that they're going to have moving forward in the decision that Jaylen Brown has to make this offseason.
Yeah, that confidence is a big part of this. I mean, look, we have seen through the first 3 games of the series that the Celtics certainly have parts of their game or roster construction that can be exploited. And when you have things that can be exploited and you feel like they're going to be inevitably, you lose confidence. You just wait for that moment that, okay, Spoelstra's going to dial up this play and it's going to screw us over. Or we're going to have to make this adjustment in order to make up for things. And we're going to be a couple possessions late to do so and not quick enough to pull the trigger on this. Or they get momentum going and we're not going to call a timeout again. It's going to be on us to try to weather the storm and figure it out on the fly when we should probably get together and change a couple different things. When you assume that the worst is about to happen, confidence completely disappears. And that's how I felt watching the Celtics team tonight, that they just assumed that the next play was going to be one made by the Miami Heat. And that is not Celtics basketball. That is not how Al Horford, how Marcus Smart play the game of basketball and how they kind of lead this team from an emotional standpoint. There are too many smart guys who know the game and process it at a high level to fall into that trap of trying to play hero ball or take first available or just shoot their way out of it. It's a really tough look for the confidence of that C's team right now. Really, really tough.
Okay. Let's take a quick commercial break. And then we're going to follow up with some NBA draft stuff for the last like 35, 40 minutes of the show and really dive into some of the teams at the top of the draft. Particularly, we're going to talk a lot about the Hornets, Blazers, Magic, and Rockets. Okay, we're back. Spins. Let's dive into some NBA draft stuff. We're going to talk combine a little bit at the end, just a very small amount, because I just want to be very clear that I think the combine wasn't as big of a deal this year as some people seem to be making it out to be.
Yep, agreed.
But let's get into some of these teams at the top and some of maybe what we've learned about their plans, some of maybe what the decision makers in power have said after the entire event of the lottery occurred and the picks are locked in place. Let's just kind of jump in and talk about this.
Sure.
So at number one, the Spurs. The Spurs are very simple, right? Like that's the reality of the situation. The Spurs are in a very simple place. They do not have to overthink this. They are taking Victor Wembanyama. The interesting thing for them moving forward to me is what they do in free agency and how quickly they decide to accelerate this timeline a little bit. Victor Wembanyama just had another dominant game over in Europe in the French League playoffs today. Looks absolutely spectacular. They have some real core pieces, as I wrote about after the combine or after the lottery. We will see what they decide to do.
Yep.
But that'll be a conversation for a later date on the Spurs.
Yep.
There's just not a lot to say about them. That's kind of where you feel on this right now, right?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would say is San Antonio, if I had any advice to give, so to speak, it's don't fall down the rabbit hole of always trying to get timelines aligned. That a lot of times when you have some good young players, the right veteran leadership or guys who can stay on an NBA floor will help those younger guys get through their growing pains a little bit sooner. So maybe a veteran, bigger body, another veteran guard out there to stabilize the ship. Those could be solid additions to the San Antonio Spurs team. They might not be around if or when they would compete for a championship in 2, 3, 4 years, but they lay the groundwork by showing everybody how to continue to be a professional, play in big pressure games, and alleviate the burden on those younger guys from year one.
Yes. Okay. Now let's jump in to pick 2. The Charlotte Hornets. This is kind of where the draft starts. This is a really important decision. And it really comes down, I would imagine, to 2 names, Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson. As Trader Cause in my Twitter comments put in, currently the odds for the second overall pick are minus 130 for Brandon Miller, minus 110 for Scoot Henderson. My read on this is this thing is like genuinely wide open, and we will see what happens. Mitch Kupchak did a press junket after, like did a press conference, a mini Zoom in from wherever he was in Charlotte or wherever he was in his hotel in Chicago to meet with the media of Charlotte. Nick Carboni of WCNC screen recorded it and everything and put out this video on Twitter, and it made Charlotte fans lose their fucking mind. So let's play this clip. Shout out to Nick. I want to make sure and give him credit. Thank you for grabbing this. Let's play the clip.
Question that we're going to take the best available player. And that's been, our position for the last 3 or 4 years when you're trying to accumulate talent. And, I don't think we're where we need to be from a talent level, but we've got a lot more talent now than we did 2 or 3 years ago. So I think we can be a little bit picky, and take into consideration, not only the overall talent, but also the position.
So that's Mitch Kupchak talking about the Charlotte Hornets at number 2 and what they can kind of consider. I understand why that made Hornets fans lose their fucking mind. This is a team that won 27 games last year. They look, I really like LaMelo Ball. I think he's definitely a guy. He could be the guy. We don't know if he's the guy yet that brings you to compete for an NBA championship, right? Those guys are a little bit different. LaMelo might be that guy. I think the odds are against it just because the level that you have to reach to be that kind of player is so obscenely high. But LaMelo, I think like is one of the few guys in the league where it's like, okay, I will accept an argument for it. Around him, you have some guys, but like, you don't really have enough. Like, Miles Bridges is a wild card here, obviously. The Hornets will have to make a decision on him. They have his restricted free agency rights. We'll see what they do there. I don't want to talk about Miles Bridges at all. But like, other than that, PJ Washington is a restricted free agent. They have to make a decision on him, right? Like, Terry Rozier is signed for 2 more years, like 3 more years, basically. The full, it looks like, 25, 26 is like almost fully guaranteed. So yeah, like they have Rozier for 3 more years. They have Cody Martin for 2 more. They have Nick Richards for 2 more. The James Bouknight pick looks like it's not going to work out. Maybe it does. Maybe he's like a late bloomer in some regard, but that looks like kind of a miss based off of what we've seen so far. I think Mark Williams showed some things. Like, I think that he was really quite impressive late in the season. Their defense was actually really good late in the season.
Yeah. Yes.
They finished 6th in the league, I believe, from February 14th onward, over the course of the latter part of the season. So like, that's a thing, I guess. And Mark Williams, I think, is a big part of that. Kai Jones, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that, based on what we've seen, looks like it could be a miss. He was always a project coming in, but I don't think we've seen enough from him to like really feel confident that that's a hit yet. I was never really a JT Thor guy. Were you?
No, nor a Kai Jones guy. Nope.
Yeah. They have Dennis Smith, who's an unrestricted free agent. Dennis, I think, was actually the biggest reason why the defense was really good late in the season. I think he was really terrific. Who knows if he'll be back? Kelly Oubre is an unrestricted free agent. And then again, like PJ Washington is like their young guy and then they have the Gordon Hayward deal, which has 1 more year left at $31.5 million. So what do you have around LaMelo Ball that makes you think you have enough right now to contend? Because you're not a free agency market. Like, we need to be real about that. Like, Charlotte, not a free agency market. I really struggle. I really struggle with it. At the end of the day, in terms of like what they're actually going to do on draft night, I think this was like a total Mitch Kupchak, just like trying to keep all options on the table answer. Like, I don't think he was tipping that they're going to pick Brandon Miller. I think that he was trying to like tip to other GMs potentially, like, we will consider Brandon Miller. We will consider Scoot Henderson. All of our options are on the table. Come to us with offers, everything like that. Right.
Yeah.
But it does feel like, at the very least, this is a very open discussion. This is not just Scoot Henderson, who has long been considered the likely number 2 overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. This will be an open conversation. And in terms of the way that Charlotte is building moving forward, they are considering fit at a time where I think they probably should not be considering fit.
So I always believe that in the top 4, 5, 6, maybe even a little bit further down in a really good draft, you always take best player available, because those are the times and you are drafting for your franchise tentpole stars. And if you find a guy who can become that and you're most confident in him doing so, you take the guy you're most confident in to do that. And the rest of the pieces you can figure out and fit later. Now, you and I had a conversation less than a week ago after the Hornets ended up number 2, after the lottery and the ping pong balls fell the way that they did, about some of the challenges that there could be on the defensive end of the floor for LaMelo Ball and Scoot Henderson tandem together. But I agree with you. I am not reading into this too much to say they're favoring Brandon Miller. They're going to make a decision that's more influenced by fit than it is by overall talent. I think this is trying to win the the media game in terms of influencing other general managers who might be interested in trading up to 2 to up their offer for the certain guy that they want, to not know what Charlotte's going to do in that position. It's too early for them to even be locked into one guy. So this is less about trying to prep everybody for, hey, we're going for Miller, and it might be controversial. I think he's just, like you said, trying to keep the options open.
I think that's right. I would just obviously like very strongly implore them to not consider fit at this point. You need to take the best player available. If you think that's Brandon Miller, like, I don't agree, but totally cool, right? Like, I think that Brandon is at least close enough to Scoot. And I've talked to enough people around the league that feel like Brandon is better than Scoot to where I will accept that as an outcome.
Sure.
Don't do it for the wrong reasons, and don't do it for the wrong process is what I would say. If you have Scoot Henderson higher on your board, take Scoot Henderson.
Yes.
By the way, like, here's the other thing. This isn't me comparing Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson in any way, shape, or form. I want to be very clear about that. Scoot Henderson is like a wild competitor.
Yes.
Like, this is me totally speculating. Do not aggregate this in any way. I find it somewhat hard to believe that Michael Jordan is not going to be very impressed by him when he does like a workout in an interview, in terms of just like the competitive drive, like the fire, the aggressiveness that he plays with, the aggressiveness that like kind of permeates out of his pores, kind of. I find it hard to believe that Michael Jordan's not going to love that dude. Just be like, I'm being completely honest with it. That again, that comes from no inside information. I don't know if they've met. I don't know if they met at the combine, whatever. Right. I just find it hard to believe that he's not going to love that dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, if we're watching the playoffs right now, we're seeing culture matter, right? The Miami Heat doing what they're doing and continuing to play against the odds and take down teams that are on paper more talented than them. They have a superior culture. They have the most competitive dudes in the building, and they have synergy and belief in what they're doing. I don't know if the Charlotte Hornets, while they might have talent or even more talent than you or I kind of give them credit for right now, I don't think they have that beacon of the culture yet. And a lot of these young teams who have drafted really good players recently, they're engaging personalities, they're versatile offensive players. Scoot Henderson is literally a culture driver. That is what we know him to be, with his work ethic, with just how insatiable he is to command the moment, but still make the right play for his team. I would want to build around that guy. So this is less about a fit argument, and it's less about a skill argument than it is like Scoot Henderson just kind of has it. And if I'm Charlotte, a team that for 20 years hasn't had a player who's had it in the building in that regard from a culture driving process, I would want him. And quite frankly, I'm pretty clear on this. I would rather have Scoot Henderson than LaMelo Ball. I would.
And I'll be honest with, like, I think Kemba Walker was someone like that.
Sure.
Like I do. I want to give some of the like past Hornets a little bit of flowers, right? Like, I think Gerald Wallace like was certainly like a big time driver of, you know, making sure that things were getting done the right way. And then I don't want to say that LaMelo doesn't do that either. It's just that his play on the court is a bit wild and it's a bit all over the place. I agree with you. As prospects, I had Scoot higher than LaMelo. I did and do. I really like LaMelo. I had LaMelo as number one in that class. I loved him. But I think Scoot's a little bit better of a prospect. I'm a big fan. Yeah. I think they can play together. I said that on lottery night. Like, I think they'd be great playing together. I think they'd be tremendous together. They'd be an awesome transition attack. Scoot has some of those like abilities to create shots in the mid-range late in the shot clock that LaMelo has a little bit of, but it tends to take like tougher shots later in the shot clock. Step backs into like the 27-foot range as opposed to like being able to create downhill and create in the mid range like Scoot can. I think that Scoot's ability to be a power rim attack player would mesh well with some of LaMelo's more like finessey, kind of crafty ball handling and playmaking. I really truly think that they would mesh incredibly well together on the court. I would love to see it. I also think there's a real case for them taking the wing who can really play in Brandon Miller because they need wings. But I don't think they're close to like trying to jumpstart this thing yet either.
Right.
I think they need to continue to accumulate the best talent possible. And that is where I think Mitch Kupchak's quote would worry me if I was a Charlotte Hornets fan. Even though I do think in terms of tipping the hand, I don't think that was a thing there.
Agree. But I like the way you said it. If you have Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson, fine. Take the right player that you think is going to be the best one. Just don't do it for the wrong reasons. Don't do it because of fit.
Okay. Let's go to Portland at number 3. The Portland Trailblazers are subject to myriad rumors now in terms of what they are going to do, what they could look to do. First, let's hear from Joe Cronin, who is their general manager and who spoke on lottery night about the Portland Trailblazers and what this pick means to their organization.
Anywhere above 5. Just in terms of like the options you have now this summer, how big of a difference is 3 from 5, 7?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. The market will tell, but I mean, I think three's significant. There's going to be some really good players available at 3 that could be great for us or somebody else, depending on how we, approach this draft.
So first and foremost, Joe Cronin. I've watched, I think, every press conference he's done so far in Portland. King of like trying to avoid saying anything at all.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Which is a vast change from Neil O'Shea when he was in Portland too.
Really actively tries to not say anything at all. Obviously there, he's saying, look, we're going to look into moving this pick. He talked about the market and what the market will dictate. And then he talked about what this could mean for something else. It's very clear they're tipping their hand that they're at least going to explore the marketplace in terms of a trade. I am less certain that Charlotte will do that. That's not to say Charlotte won't move the pick. But based off of what Mitch Kupchak's responses were versus what Joe Cronin's responses were, Joe Cronin is being active and aggressive regarding all of this.
Yep.
And I think he wants to be able to hear what is out there on the market, given the Damian Lillard of this entire situation.
I think there's an element of this here too, that he's signaling clearly from the very beginning. Hey, we're open for business. Whatever your best offer is, like, start preparing them now. We are definitely going to listen throughout the next month here. But it almost feels like he's hoping someone else will make the decision of what to do with Damian Lillard or keep or trade the number 3 overall pick for him by just making the right offer that he can't refuse, right? If the trade market comes back and they're getting a ton of phone calls because everyone knows they're open for business and they get that one offer they can't refuse, okay, now we know we have to start from scratch here. We've got to hit the reset button. Or vice versa, the phones aren't really ringing. Nobody's that enthusiastic about moving up to number 3, particularly because they don't know what will happen with Charlotte at number 2. And he's saying, all right, now we have to prepare as an organization a lot more to have Brandon and Scoot here. So I don't know, a lot of public posturing going on this last week.
A lot of public posturing. I'm trying to figure out what I think is the most likely outcome for them. And I do think it is genuinely all on the table. Like, yeah. I really struggle with it because, like, here's the other thing. Like, that front office just got into place and they spent quite a bit of money putting that front office into place. And I would imagine that those front office executives feel pretty secure in their position right now. They're a newer front office. They really brought in a lot of very talented people, including, you know, obviously Mike Schmitz is known for the draft. So like, let's call him out here. Like, I would imagine that Mike and everybody in that front office feels very much like they have some, like they're not going to get fired anytime soon. You know what I mean? Like they're not in any danger of losing their jobs. Houston at number 4, those guys probably need to take a leap next year, right? I don't know I don't think Portland's in the same boat here, given that they just changed over the front office. They acquired a lot of talented front office people. It would be a lot to get rid of those guys that quickly. So with that being said, it will be very interesting to me to see what their move is, because you can easily see a world where they just like, if Scoot Henderson falls, they're just like, we are taking Scoot. Like why, if you're that front office, you feel like you have job security. Why wouldn't you take him and pair him with Shaedon Sharpe? You'd have the most athletic backcourt in the NBA for years. And Shaedon Sharpe showed a lot late in the season that he might be like a real dude that's like a difference maker for your team. And that's not to say you trade Damian Lillard. Maybe at that point, you have Scoot, you have Shaedon Sharpe, you retain Jeremy Grant. Could you maybe look into like an Anthony Simons and number 23 for DeAndre Ayton kind of thing? Like, is that something that would work? That seems like not disastrous, right? Like a Simons for Ayton kind of thing.
For Portland, that's certainly not disastrous. I don't think.
Maybe it's Nurkic and 23, you know, for Ayton, but like you have to include other salary with Nurkic to get there money wise. So like, I'm just throwing things at the table, like on the table here in terms of like real potential things. Like maybe it's a 3-team deal and Portland has to get something else back to move Simons in 23, right? There are a number of things that you can do here if you're Portland. I don't think it's as simple as like, it's like one player that you're going out and acquiring for number 3. If you have DeAndre Ayton, Jeremy Grant, Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, Damian Lillard, you retain Matisse Thybulle, retain Cam Reddish, you go out into free agency, you try and go get some minimum guys that you think can be high upside rotation players. That's like not a disastrous, that's like a potential quick turn, right?
It is, but it also feels like threading the needle, right? And we've seen these teams that have tried to play both timelines, so to speak, not necessarily nail either of them. And it can put them at a little bit of a disadvantage from a franchise building standpoint. So I think it gives Portland the most optionality beyond this June to continue to make decisions, to field a roster and kind of kick the can down the line a little bit more while still appeasing Dame Lillard by still getting better from where they were this year. But it really does feel, because they have that security in that front office, that they don't need to try to thread the needle and kind of have it both ways. That if they feel it's time to commit to doing something, they can do it.
And by the way, like the same thing goes for Brandon Miller, right? Like, let's say it's Brandon Miller there at 3. You can have Damian Lillard, Shaedon Sharpe, Brandon Miller, Jeremy Grant, try and make a move for DeAndre Ayton, you know, continue down that road, right? Yeah. So I think that there's just a lot on the table for Portland that they can realistically do. And again, it doesn't have to be as simple as like going to get one player for the number 3 overall pick. Is there a world where you could do something like, I don't know. I'm just like throwing shit at the wall on some level. Like, is there, I don't know if Houston would do this, but like, let's say Houston thinks there's a tier break between the top 3 players and 4, right? I have no idea if that's true. right? I have no idea. This is just me like throwing things at the wall.
Yep.
Could you do something if you're Portland, like number 3 for like OG Anunoby and Tari Eason, where Houston gets to move up from 4 to 3 and give up Tari Eason to do so. Toronto gets 3. Maybe you have to give up something else if you're Toronto. To me, this is not as simple as like one play. I'm not doing this just to say like this is a good idea or anything. I don't know if this is a good idea, frankly. Houston might think that there are 4 great guys in this draft class and they don't want to give up Tari Eason for that, right? And that's a completely reasonable assessment. But I don't think it's as simple as there being one guy that you're making the number 3 overall deal for in this class. Like Pascal Siakam has 1 year left on his contract. OG Anunoby has 1 year left on his contract. I'm like trying to like run through the gamut in my brain in terms of like things that matter. Who else? Name other names for me. DeAndre Ayton is not worth the number 3 overall pick.
No.
Mikal Bridges, it seems like, according to my colleague, John Hollinger, it is not available. So
good.
It's not as simple as just like you move 3 and it gets you 1 player.
Yeah.
There are worlds where like you slide down from 3 to 5, pick up additional assets. This is a team that needs a lot of different assets. Slide down from 3 to 6. Maybe you pick up 11 in the process. You move number 6 for OG Anunoby. You take, Kobe Buffkin or whoever the fuck you want to take at number 11, right? Like, I'm literally just throwing out names.
Sure.
My point is that I think that if they move this pick, it's not as simple as people are making it in terms of the process.
Totally agree with that. And part of the reason, because as you mentioned, there isn't that one neat player available who is just as valuable, if not more valuable for this team than the number 3 overall pick. And like, I'm an evaluator by trade, right? I watch a lot more college basketball and pre-draft tape than I do anything else. But having done so for the last couple of years, where I feel in my evaluation at this point is that I would feel much more comfortable hanging on to the number 3 overall pick, regardless of what that does for my immediate return right now, than to trade that away to fail at building a contender around Damian Lillard for the next 2, 3, 4 years while he's in his prime max, and then watch that player succeed and kick my ass for the next half decade somewhere else. That's just kind of where I see it, but comes from a place of believing there is a very strong top 3 and top 4 in this draft class.
Oh, just to be completely honest, if I was Portland here and I got this number 3 overall pick and Scoot Henderson fell to me, I would just move Damian Lillard. Like, I know that's not a popular take. Damian Lillard is one of my favorite players in the NBA. I adore him. Yeah. I think he is an unbelievable basketball player. I think he would come to Portland and try to like destroy you every single time if you moved him and like did it like semi against his will.
Yeah.
But like if Dame comes to me and says, move this pick or I don't want to be here anymore, like move this pick for vets because I, want to try and compete now. And the option is having, 2 more years of Damian Lillard's prime or having 8 years of Scoot Henderson. I'm taking 8 years of Scoot Henderson plus what I get back for Damian Lillard. Like, and I love the guy. I think he's everything that I want to build an organization around, everything I want to build a franchise around. The only issue is that the clock is running out on him. And this team is so far away. They're so far away from competing right now. It has nothing to do with who Damian Lillard is as a player. He's incredible. They're just so far away, and they're more than 2 years away from him being, or from getting there for him.
Yep. It's not just that they're so far away. It's that they're so far away without a ton of means to correct how far away they are instantly. And you wish that the number 3 overall pick would be enough to do so. But the way that they're kind of the young guys on their roster set up the contracts that they have, like, it's not going to be one summer of flip-flopping things around and all of a sudden they look like a real contender again. Because of that, it's less about Dame and it's more about the long-term window for the organization with Dame.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated to see what happens with that.
Yeah.
It's by far the most interesting situation in the league
Yeah.
to me. They have the number 3 overall pick in a draft that has Scoot Henderson, who might fall to number 3. And then on top of it, they have Damian Lillard, who is this aging, incredible superstar, and I don't know what they're going to do. It's definitely the most interesting spot in the league. Okay. Now I get to lay out everything with Houston and James Harden, because I think that James Harden holds a lot of the keys to what they do at number 4. So give me a bit of space to isolate here, Adam Spinella. Over the last week, we have gotten numerous reports about James Harden. I am going to parse through all of them here. Adrian Wojnarowski, I believe on the day before the lottery, said it was a real possibility back on Christmas, and it remains so. Houston is a very real possibility for Philadelphia's James Harden in free agency. They want to be much better next season. There's a comfort level in Houston for James Harden. He's got family there. He's very comfortable in that environment. This is an organization where he knows ownership. He knows the front office. Regardless of whether they win the lottery and can draft Victor Wembanyama, my sense is that it would not necessarily change the Rockets' intentions to pursue James Harden. That's going to be the story here between now and July. And then later on in the interview, he then went on to say as well, I wouldn't underestimate it just as a leverage play. I think he's very serious about returning, but he also then went into explaining why it could be a leverage play, right? And explained that this could be like a real thing that's happening. Zach Lowe and Tim McMahon recently on the Low Post both said the Rockets think James Harden is coming. Keith Pompey from the Philadelphia Inquirer, I believe on Friday, reported the belief among NBA executives is that James Harden will rejoin the Houston Rockets this summer. Rockets owner Tillman Fertitta loves the 76ers point guard, and the franchise expects to reunite with him, sources say. Before the Rockets hired Ime Udoka on April 25th, head coaching candidates were asked during the interview process for their opinion on coaching Harden, according to sources. Later in the story, he says, sources have said his interest in returning to Houston is mutual and not a play to get a lucrative deal out of the Sixers. His mother still lives in the city. He has several business ventures there. And as one source said, he's treated like a god in Houston. Now, Chris Haynes, I believe a little bit before the Pompey report, so somewhere in the middle of last week. Philadelphia 76ers star James Harden intends to decline his $35.6 million player option to become an unrestricted free agent this summer in order to secure a long-term deal, league sources tell Bleacher Report. Harden took a sizable pay cut last offseason to help the Sixers build the roster out. The guard will now be seeking a 4-year contract. The 10-time All-Star is coming off of a season average 21 points, 6 rebounds, and a league-leading 10.7 assists. The Houston Rockets have long been a rumored destination, but sources say Harden will only entertain suitors that present a competitive roster and the basketball freedom for the star to be himself. Houston was not very competitive here, right? That's a realistic outcome here. Then, not in this same story, but later in the week, I believe he said this on his show, Chris Haynes said, at the moment, the Sixers are the only logical option coming off of a third-place finish in the Eastern Conference in the regular season. But the dynamic in Philadelphia will undoubtedly change next season, considering the Sixers have to find the right coach after dismissing Doc Rivers. That leads into Ramona Shelburne on the Anthony Gargano show. Ramona Shelburne talked about why Harden and the 76ers just had issues, right? She said, the Harden-Doc Rivers thing was never great. There was a lot behind it. There was this team meeting I had heard about where Doc tried to say something about him going out on the road. And how does that look? How does that look to your teammates? If you're going to do that, you've really got to show up in the game. There was a lot of trying to hold James accountable in certain ways. Doc Rivers is no longer the coach of the Philadelphia 76ers. Daryl Morey said in his press conference regarding the Doc Rivers firing, we can't have the discussions yet regarding James Harden, but we are interested in bringing him back. On his relationship with Rivers, which James Harden characterized as just okay at one point, I believe after they had lost. I think Morey said, I think people make too much of these snap answers right after a loss like that. I think Doc had a great relationship with his players. We wouldn't have had the success we had without it. And his relationship with both Joel and James was very strong. I think people saw that chemistry on the court between the three of them, and that was something that was not an issue. That is all of the scope of James Harden and the Houston Rockets at this point. There are things that are contradictory there. There are things that are not mutually exclusive to one another in there. I think certainly there is very clearly James Harden in Houston Rockets interest, and it seems to be mutual. It's just whether or not James Harden decides that's the best situation for him. Parsing through all of this, I kind of think that it's still the best thing for him to stay in Philly. And I still don't really understand. I understand why Houston wants him. It's not the road I would go down, I guess is the way I would say it. Especially if the cost is a 4-year max deal.
Yeah.
That feels like you're locking yourself into James Harden, who suffered an Achilles injury late in the season that I think went way under the radar. We talked about that on this show a couple of times, that I think the Achilles injury really sapped his explosiveness, his ability to get to the basket. Also, James Harden's not getting any younger. These things are going to pile up. He's going to continue to suffer these little injuries and stuff. James Harden's a great player.
Great.
I don't know how much sense this makes for Houston if the cost is an exorbitant deal, which it seems like Chris Haynes certainly is saying in his report, saying the guard will now be seeking a 4-year contract. Where, Adam, go.
Oh.
I've talked now for 7 minutes.
My turn to ISO here. So yeah, the Houston thing, it hasn't really clicked for me as to why the Houston Rockets would be super interested in a lot of this stuff. In bringing Harden back, doesn't seem to mesh with their timeline. Doesn't seem to be the guy that would get the most out of some of the younger players that they have on the roster, or really grow their style of basketball to the point where they could just hand the torch from Harden to Jalen Green or whoever else when James's time in Houston has come up. To me, it's more so we want to win now. We think we need to win a little bit sooner, and James helps us get to that point. But if he really is requiring such a long-term contract, I do not believe the ends justify the means in that situation. What I keep coming back to is the idea for Philadelphia that they, as a group, cannot afford to let James Harden leave. What happens to this Sixers team? What happens to Joel Embiid if James Harden is not there next year and he just bolts via free agency? Man, that's a tough pill to swallow if you're the reigning MVP and Joel Embiid. That's a really hard player and production to replace based on where the Sixers are asset-wise, cap-wise, free agent structure, etc.
Yeah. Here's the thing. If you're Houston, I don't know how much sense it makes for you to offer him a 4-year max. Right. If you're Philadelphia, you have no leverage here.
You got to do it.
You have to do it.
Yep.
And on top of it, you're going to get 8% raises versus 5% raises, assuming that stays similar in the CBA. Right. So you basically have, the mechanisms in place here say that Philadelphia is very incentivized to do it. Houston is somewhat incentivized to do it, but I don't know if they're incentivized to do it all the way for all of it and the whole boat here. Houston is incentivized to get better next season. I would imagine that Tillman Fertitta and the Fertitta family of which, Patrick Fertitta is certainly involved, it seems like, based on reporting. You want to get better next season. And I would imagine that the front office knows that they could be moved on from if they don't improve and show real growth next season. I don't know necessarily what those things say or like what those stakes are. Do you have to get to 41 wins? Do you have to get to 500? Do you have to make the play-in? Do you have to make the playoffs? That's what we don't know yet in terms of like what that could mean for this front office, right? I don't know. I don't want to speculate. James Harden certainly helps you win next year. Like he does. Pairing him with Jalen Green moves Jalen off the ball more, allows him to be more of a dynamic scorer. James Harden with Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün gives me real terror on defense, to be completely honest, especially with the younger guys on the wing.
Yeah.
And on top of it, now you're in like the middle of like, kind of cores again, right? The same problem Portland would have by trying to draft Scoot Henderson and then keeping Damian Lillard, right? Like you're trying to play both sides of the coin here.
Yeah.
I don't love this for Houston. Like I'm not a big fan of the Harden thing in Houston. I'm not. I understand that like for fans, it would really mean a lot for James Harden to be back. I get that like, I'll look this up while I'm talking, but like I'm pretty sure that Houston has like struggled a bit in terms of like getting fans out to games recently. So yeah, they had 668,000 people at the Toyota Center last year in total. That's 28th out of 30th in the NBA, according to Basketball Reference. So I get that all of those things are factors. I get that like Tillman Fertitta wants to win. I get that he probably wants to make money from attendance. I get that it's a show and we need like purely from a team building perspective. I don't think James Harden's the dude. I think we've seen that like in Philly, he might not even be able to be the second dude at this point of his career. So if you have to shell out a max to sign him, I don't know where that gets you in 3 years when the rest of your core is ready to compete. And oh, by the way, this is a team that has, let's ballpark it $50-60 million in cap space. You're going to have to use almost all of your cap space to sign him. So you can't fill out as much as you could, which then leads into my next question, Adam Spinella.
Okay. All right.
Let's say that this comes to fruition. Let's say that James Harden goes back to Houston. And let's say they know about it before the draft. What does that mean for Houston?
What should it mean or what likely does it mean? I think those are two different questions for me because
I don't know if it is necessarily, but I understand your point.
Yeah. I have been pretty clear. I believe that there is a tier break after number 4 in this draft. And I am a big fan of Amen Thompson. If you're Houston Rockets and one of Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Amen Thompson is available at 4, I think you take whoever that is. And I think all 3 of those guys have ways of fitting in decently well next to some of the younger core pieces that you already have on this roster. I think Scoot would be the absolute best fit, but I think Amen Thompson, as you and I talked about last week, would be a pretty fun backcourt partner for Jalen Green to have long-term. It does feel like we're putting the cart before the horse by saying, all right, we're bringing in this guy in his mid-30s coming off of an Achilles injury, paying him so much money. And then we're either going to draft around him for fit, or we're going to take a guy in Amen Thompson who now we've just got this log jam of guys who are best with the ball in their hands and hope that we make it work enough to win games because now we have to since we have Harden in town. It just feels so clunky to me. Like with the Portland side, there's at least enough talent and versatility to the roster to make it fit in a lot of different ways. Like this doesn't feel right to me. It just doesn't feel right.
It feels like, to me, a team that could be making some dangerous choices because they don't have access to their own pick next year. That goes to Brooklyn, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then they also have a front office that like could be really trying to win games right now in order to save their job.
Yeah, the pick thing, Sam, real quickly, the pick thing to me just is infuriating. Like a sunk cost is a sunk cost. You're not getting that back.
And for what it's worth, the pick is protected. Like it's protected 1 through 4, right? Like it goes to Oklahoma City, actually. I'm sorry, it doesn't go to Brooklyn. The Brooklyn stuff, I believe starts. No, they're done with Brooklyn. It's Oklahoma City. Yeah, it's not Brooklyn. Brooklyn has picks going to them. My brain broke for a second because Brooklyn acquired Harden. But it's Oklahoma City. The pick's going out to Oklahoma City, and it's top 4 protected. So you could just be terrible again. But again, like you run the risk of completely falling out of the draft at that point, if that's the case. And also next year's draft is terrible. So you don't really want to be in that draft. I went through it earlier again today. I've got real worries about that thing.
Yeah.
I've got like real worries about that thing. So I say all of this to say, like, if James Harden wants to come back to Houston on like, I don't know, a 1+1 or like a 2+1 with like a team option on the end of it or something like that, I'm here for it. Like that's interesting to me. Like I'm okay with that. I'm not real interested in James Harden on like a 4-year max at this point. For them, like for Philly, you got to do it. You got to do what you got to do to keep him. But, and if you're James Harden, like I want to prove I can win. And like, I'm not going to be able to prove I can win in Houston next year. Like Houston can make every single correct decision from now until, the start of the season. And they're still not going to be able to compete for a title next year at the same level that Philly is, at the very least. So, yeah. I'm just, And look, like if it's me, if it's Houston, like if Houston's bringing in Harden, what my worry would be is they look to move the pick then at that point.
Oh, no.
And that would be crazy to me. Don't do that.
No.
Take whoever you have, be it. I wonder if then do you start to consider Cam Whitmore over Amen Thompson? If you have Harden, you have Jalen Green, is that when you start to consider that?
Maybe. I mean, maybe it's more of a trade back than it's a trade out, right? Like maybe you try to get to 6 and 11 from Orlando. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's only so many more young players they can add to the roster too. Like this is very fully young guys already.
Yeah. Like Russell Thomas, I think he's right here. He says Rockets would improve a ton with Harden, takes the ball away from their sloppy playmakers, and Şengün will benefit massively as he'll be playing with an elite pick and roll point guard. Completely with you, Russell. They will be so much better with James Harden next year. They're starting from a baseline of 22 wins though. And what can you add? Like, I don't think James Harden's like a 20-win player, right? Maybe you could say he's like a 10-win player and you can go from like internal development from Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason. You can get up 10 more, maybe. Like you might be able to sell me on this team getting to like 42 wins next year with James Harden.
But there is no way Harden and Şengün are adequately defending a pick and roll either, right? We can talk about how much of a maestro they'd be on the offensive end of the floor. They are getting shredded on defense with those two surrounded by a younger roster. Jeez.
Yeah, and specifically the defensive structure does not work because Şengün is best defensively, in my opinion, right now, kind of showing and recovering for the most part, right? And being able to like use the mobility that he has, showing and recovering, and like using his hand-eye coordination and everything, kind of like Jokic does for Denver in his best settings. He can't really play and drop right now, and he can't switch right now. James Harden is best as a switch defender. He doesn't really fight over screens well. He doesn't really get through those actions. So I think they're actually like pretty incompatible defensively, actually.
Yep.
Which then makes me wonder, like, okay, who else do they look to sign, right? Do they look to go after, like for instance, like Brook Lopez is a free agent, right? Do they look after Brook Lopez? Do they try and make a trade for Miles Turner? Like, number of things that could happen here, right? So this is all a mess. I don't like any of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I get why it would all happen. I'm just not in favor of it. Maybe that's the best way to kind of close it up, right?
Yeah. Stay the course, Houston. James, get the bag in Philly and try to compete for a championship. You can do both. And you had a great season there last year from a statistical standpoint. Like, a new coach, if you feel comfortable with it, will allow you to play more of your style and vocalize that to ownership now. And this all takes care of itself.
Yeah. And by the way, what I just said, like, you know, I can squint and get to 42 wins if Harden is as good as what he was this year, right? Because like that would involve them having a top 7 offense in the league, probably, because they're not going to defend. Like, there's just no way they're going to defend.
No.
Right. That involves no drop off from Harden going from 33 to 34 this year. And like James Harden likes to go out, like likes to have a good time. How well do we think James Harden's going to age as a player? Like Damian Lillard, I feel Damian Lillard's going to age well.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how James Harden will age. And I think he certainly came in this season and was like very competitive and like wanted to win. I don't know how great about it I feel, especially given the fact that like he has all of these very high leverage, high usage possessions on his odometer, right? Like James Harden has played 35,000 minutes in the regular season, along with 6,000 more in the postseason. And a lot of those are like drives to the basket, falling to the ground, getting fouled. Like, it's a hard life. Like, even taking away like how James likes to live his life off the court, which is great, and I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Like, reportedly, allegedly,
Sure.
according to reports over the years upon years upon years. And apparently Ramona Shelburne, who just said that Doc Rivers decided to confront him in a locker room. Even removing that, like a guy with this many minutes, this many hard minutes where he's been hit and bumped and like drove to the basket constantly. This is just like not a player I'd be interested in if I was Houston. I get that there's history here. I get it. I'm just like kind of out on it in general, I would say.
Yeah. And if
it would be a massive risk, it'd be a massive, massive risk.
And if you're thinking, well, you know, at least there's Jalen Green there who can be more the athletic guy to get in the lane and live in the lane, and Harden plays more off ball, like, then don't sign James Harden to a max contract for 4 years if you're planning on playing him as a non-primary option into his twilight years anyway. Like, that doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay. Last one here. Let's go to the Orlando Magic.
Sure.
Okay. The Orlando Magic have 6-11. They're in a very interesting position. Here's Jeff Weltman at the NBA Draft Combine speaking about all of this.
You know, for the architecture of our team, what allows us to play the best basketball, what gives us the greatest upside, and how we move forward.
To just take us through a little bit of all that. I mean, a lot will go into decision making, looking at players that might fit in those spots. Do you package picks? Do you use some of those in a deal? Just how much decision making goes through that process over the next month or so?
Yeah, well, it starts tomorrow. We'll all be in the gym tomorrow is the start of the combine, so we'll all be butterflying around, talking to one another and trying to assess what other teams are trying to accomplish this cycle. And then obviously, you get more information through the visits, and that's when you'll really start to understand how teams slot into their picks, and it'll be a ramp up, and obviously the last week being the frenzied week, but the next few weeks will be kind of just accumulating information, meeting guys, and obviously cross-pollinating with a lot of teams.
So the things that Jeff Weltman said there that I thought were interesting. He talked about upside, right? Who gives us the greatest upside long-term for our team? Really interesting to compare that to Mitch Kupchak earlier, right? Second, talking about cross-pollinating, talking about potential, teams and everything like that, how this draft will kind of work itself out. Also really interesting to me. And it seems like they are a potential team that could look to make some trades on draft night. Does that strike you as what you heard from Jeff Weltman there?
Yeah, in some regard, I think it's a lot of it is just trying to get a lay for the landscape, right? A lot of teams who are rumored to be trade partners or either trade out of their picks, like if there's a plausible scenario when you as a general manager have the assets to make a move on draft night, I think it only makes sense for you leading up to the draft to position yourself as saying, well, maybe we will, we're open to anything, because that just means that you're going to get the best and the most clear conversations with everybody else out there. So to me, this is a smart public play by Orlando and by Jeff Weltman to try to say, yeah, we're kind of open to anything. And I think that you keyed on that word, that upside is the biggest part of this, because when other people will hear upside, they'll hear trade up.
Well, it's not a secret, the guys that the Orlando Magic tend to value, sure, right? It's funny that their two best draft picks over the last little while are Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner, both of whom don't really have these traits, but they do tend to really value length, athleticism, positional size, everything like that, and upside. They're willing to take flyers on guys like that, right? So this draft features quite a few of those guys, quite a few. And it's interesting to me that seems to be where they're going. This is a team certainly that could make a move up the board if they want to. Like I mentioned earlier in this podcast and on lottery night, let's say Scoot Henderson falls to 3 and Portland is set on moving the pick. 6'11" and Wendell Carter is a really interesting package for them. I think it solves your center problem that Yusuf Nurkic is not good enough anymore. It allows you to pick up 2 pick assets for 6 and 11 in 6 and 11 for number 3. You can keep a lottery pick at number 11 or number 6, and you can move number 6, which is a better pick to move for one of these guys from a value perspective in terms of OG Anunoby, whatever names you want to throw out there for the Portland Trail Blazers. That's interesting to me. If they don't think Markelle Fultz or Jalen Suggs are their point guard of the future. I really like Markelle Fultz. I think he's a terrific basketball player. I think Markelle Fultz is I don't know, what do you want to call him? 20th, 25th best point guard in the league? That's probably what he is.
He's
right?
very good, but he's also limited in some regard, particularly when you know that you have Banchero, who is probably going to be your number 1 option when the game's on the line. You need more of a floor spacer in the backcourt.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that his scoring upside is also a bit limited long term, as long as the shot isn't there. Maybe he can get there, but I don't know. Jalen Suggs to me at this point profiles best as like a Marcus Smarty
Yes.
kind of guy. Which means like I'll just live with being wrong about him. I thought he had way more upside than that offensively, but I'm not sure the feel is there in ball screens to really project much more than that. But again, like if that's your guy, you still need like that answer in the backcourt that can be like a primary driver. So that's interesting. Like the idea of trading up for them is interesting. I would not trade back if I was them, or I would not trade out into a different draft if I was them.
Yes.
This is the draft to have 2 top 11 picks. Them just keeping 6 and 11 makes total sense to me. You take like Taylor Hendricks and Grady Dick, and you get the floor spacing you need, and you have a bunch of like athleticism, defensive ability with Grady or Taylor Hendricks. You can go super big across the front court with like Hendricks, Banchero, Franz Wagner at the 3-4-5. Get all of the floor spacing from Wagner and Hendricks. That means you probably stick a rim protector on those guys, but you're clearing out the lane for Paulo, who takes on the best opposing team's offensive player. That's like an awesome idea for me if I'm them. I would even consider like trying to do what I could to package to move up from like number 11 to number 8 to confirm that I get Grady Dick even. And that probably wouldn't be that like crazy expensive in my opinion. It could be like a future first. Grady Dick like might not in a vacuum look incredible like that. But for this team particularly, yes, I think it would really help. Or they might just like go super upside hunting and take Cam Whitmore and just like go for it, right? Cam Whitmore fits a lot of what they look for. Super athlete, great positional size, great positional length. Like that's a good fit, I think, across the board. So
yeah, no better time to take a high swing than when you have 2 lottery picks either. So upside is the play of the day, and the Orlando Magic have a ton of optionality that they can do with these 2 selections. I agree, trading out of this draft or moving to get assets in another year is not going to be a very smart play, just because I don't care for the top end of next year's draft class. And I do believe that being in the top 11 is a great place to be, with a little bit of a drop off after where I perceive those 11 guys to be. So if I'm Orlando, like it's move up or reconfigure the board to get the right guys for us if we feel they're not going to be around at 6 and 11, but they're in a really, really comfortable spot from a roster building standpoint.
Yeah. Really interesting. Really, really interesting situation, I think, for Orlando, because they have so much flexibility. They have so many young guys. They have so many picks in this draft at the very least. I'm intrigued. I'm very, very intrigued by where this goes moving forward for the Orlando Magic, who are in as good of a position now, I think, in terms of young talent as you will find around the league.
Yep. Totally agree.
Okay. Real quick, just going to buzz through a couple questions people have.
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Philip Flores, any chance Charlotte picks Amen at number 2? I would imagine that they will visit with both Amen and Asor Thompson. Right? Like,
yeah, I think they have to. I think as we've talked about through this process, like, I mentioned this a week ago, if you're Houston and you want to move up to get Scoot Henderson to go from 4 to 2, I think you have to meet with Amen to know what he's like if you're engaging in the possibilities of moving back to 4 and picking up additional assets.
Absolutely right. I would be surprised if it was Amen Thompson at number 2, especially given that it's
Right.
They have LaMelo Ball already. I would venture it's one of Scoot or Brandon Miller, but though I would certainly imagine they will meet with him. Could Spins and Sam rank their best fits for the Pacers 1 through 4 between Hendricks, Asar, Whitmore, and Jarris Walker, please?
Ooh, okay. I'll go first here. Hendricks is 1 for me. Love the fit of Hendricks in Indiana. Caitlin Cooper, shout out. Caitlin just had an awesome piece on her Patreon about how Hendricks kind of fits there and echoes a lot of the positive things that I feel. I'd have Whitmore 2, Walker 3, and Asor last.
I would probably go. It's hard because I have Whitmore a tier above these guys. I have him at number 5, and that's like a tier break for me. If we're saying purely in terms of the fit on the roster and the way that would work, because I think there is quite a bit of overlap between Whitmore and Ben Mathurin, I would say Hendricks, Jarris, probably a Sore Whitmore in terms of just purely the fit on this roster. In terms of who I would like, what my board would look like for them, I would have Cam at number 1 because I think Cam's a stud. But like, if we're talking purely fit, I think that is how I would rank it in terms of fit, right?
Sure, I can see it. I struggle with a Sore above any of the bigger guys. If we're talking just about fit, I think a bigger body who can play the 4 is important for Indiana, particularly in a way that doesn't allow opponents to hide smaller guys on Miles Turner at times.
By the way, thing I just thought about, I'm so excited for Caitlin Cooper to have to watch Overtime Elite tape.
Oh boy.
Caitlin,
Yeah.
I feel so bad.
No.
She's going to be like, what in the world is this?
Yeah. Yep. The strobe lights will go on while the ball's still in the air being shot. And she's going to be like,
this is a good podcast idea. After Caitlin watches Overtime Elite, I might have her on the podcast.
That's perfect.
I might need to talk about that with her. Okay. How much are you willing to give up to Charlotte for Scoot if you're Houston?
Whatever it takes. It's my answer. But that's just me. Whatever it takes.
So you would give up 4 and Jalen Green for number 2?
I don't think it would take that.
But you said whatever it takes.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't. Let me put it this way. If I'm answering you, Sam Vecini, on the podcast, whatever it takes. If I'm calling Mitch Kupchak at what am I comfortably offering or trying to get out of this, I mean, 4, and I would put Jabari on the table. I don't think I wouldn't offer up Jalen, but I would put Jabari on the table if it really got me there.
I would be willing to do 4 and probably the 2026 Brooklyn pick, which could end up being like quite valuable. Yeah. I'd have to think more about that.
Would you put Jabari on with that one? If they wanted 4 and Jabari for 2, would you do it? So you can play Tari Eason at the 4.
Funny thing, if I'm signing James Harden, I'm probably more willing to put Jalen on than Jabari.
Oh, sure.
And I think you could make a case for doing that. I probably wouldn't do it, though.
Okay.
Probably would not do either there. Let's see here. What else do we got? Do you see Toronto as a player to trade up for number 3 on draft night? I'd imagine they'll talk about it. Like, there's just quite a bit of synergy between Portland if they really want to compete with Damian Lillard, and Toronto having Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby on expiring deals. Would be really interested to know what Toronto wants to do. I think it also depends a lot on, like, do Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent want to stay? If they don't want to stay, then you have no backcourt and it gets really hard for you, and you probably do look to move those guys, or you could look to move those guys. I don't know if you probably do. So I don't know. That I would imagine that those 2 teams will have conversations because I think there is potential synergy there.
Yeah, I think Portland, Orlando, and Toronto are 3 really fascinating teams in some form or fashion to be able to watch on draft night. Like, obviously, Houston might want to move or do some things a little bit differently, but I think they're fine at 4. Like, Portland, Orlando, and Toronto are the 3 who I'm going to be keeping my eye on the most.
From Phoenix Plays, I have a question. It's already about a prospect that's been drafted. What do you see Scotty Barnes and Cade Cunningham's trajectories as in terms of floor? Oh, I wish I had looked at this before I put it up on the screen, because that is a complicated question.
I'm just having Ron Burgundy like, oh, I immediately regret this decision.
I immediately regret this decision. In terms of floor, I think Cade is like definitely a starter. I can see a world where he's like a top 60 player in the league, something like that, versus being like a potential star. I think he's going to be a star, but if we're talking purely floor outcomes, given the fact that he's coming off of injury and given all of those things, sure. I think Scotty's floor, if they both stay healthy, is probably a little bit lower if the shot doesn't get figured out. Yeah. I think Scotty's floor is probably like I don't know, like, you answer this one. I answered the Cade one.
Sure. So I think
I don't want to get into the Scotty wars tonight. I have regrets on this question.
The floor is so related to shooting for both of them, right? Like Cade Cunningham, we've already seen he's an incredibly cerebral playmaker, but if teams go under ball screens with him all the time and he can't play off ball next to Jaden Ivey, like he's clearly not going to rise into being a top 15, 20 player. So still starter quality, but just some clunky fits next to other players. For Scotty, he's got to lean into just being a really consistent defensive specialist. Like we've seen times where he might be inconsistent on that end of the floor. And when you don't shoot it and you're not consistent on D, I think Scotty's floor ends up being more of like legitimate sixth man, kind of trot you out there and play you at a lot of different matchups type of guy. But I don't think either outcome is likely to happen. I want to be very clear.
Yeah. I think both of these guys, these are like worst case scenario outcomes for these guys. That was the point of the question here. This is a question made for Adam Spinella. How much better of a prospect is Jordan Hawkins over Ben Shepherd?
In 2 years, Jordan Hawkins will probably be still running around screens, but he'll be as old and experienced as Ben Shepherd is. Like I like Ben a hell of a lot. I love Ben Shepherd as a prospect. But I think Hawkins' definable skill of shooting gravity coming off of screens makes him slightly more valuable, which probably means he's a little bit better a prospect, even though he has more holes in his game than Shepherd does right now.
Yeah. I would take Hawkins because I think he's a much better athlete.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably a little bit more on-ball potential there, but I'm coming around pretty quickly on Shepherd, which is an Adam Spinella special.
Top 35, baby.
That's around where I have him right now.
Yes.
I have him like 35 to 40, and I'm writing about him as soon as we finish the show. Has Amari Bailey shown enough for teams to like him as a point guard? Adam, you just did the Amari Bailey scouting report. Give us the dive.
I did. If I'm going to put the ball in somebody's hands as a scorer or a facilitator, I want to know what their main trait is offensively. What is the one thing that they're best at that they can get off regardless of who's defending them or if they get the ball in their hands, what's their go-to? I haven't found it really with Bailey right now. Like decent mid-range shooter, worry about some of the decision-making, negative assist to turnover ratio this year. Sometimes he over dribbles. Sometimes he picks up his dribble way too early and just puts the ball over his head, searching for the guy he's going to pass it to. I'm a little bit frustrated by the lack of in-between game or feel other than just taking a pull-up jumper. Doesn't have range out to three. A lot of teams went under and dared him to shoot. Like I would be pretty hesitant to label him as a point guard despite the positive showing that he had at the combine earlier this week. I get the upside, but I'm just not quite there.
Yeah, I don't buy him as a point. I think there are some interesting things that he showed as like a second side ball handler and creator when he has that extra space in like an NBA court. That's a real thing that I think matters. This season at UCLA, there was no space to operate whatsoever. It was a significant problem. He had Jaime Jaquez. He had a non-offensive center, basically in a Dembona. Tiger Campbell was there, but Tiger Campbell obviously dominated the ball in such a substantial way. Amari was a little bit more of like a transition player. I do think that he showed a lot at the combine, which was really important in terms of his passing and playmaking. I think he did move the needle. Like Frank, like I'll be honest with you. So maybe this is me just getting like loopy at an hour 40 now. When I talk to people about Amari Bailey playing at the combine, like the expectations were not high for him based off of what we'd seen this year. He drastically exceeded expectations in a great way.
Yep.
He deserves a lot of credit for coming in, competing, being as creative on the ball as he was. I thought that it was really impressive for him to come in and play the way he did. And he did really help himself in my mind in like a big substantial way. Do you agree with that?
I do, but I would still, I'm not there on first round talk. I've heard a little bit of that coming out over the last week. I'm not quite there on Bailey at all.
Yeah. I am not there at all on Amari Bailey either. All due respect to him. But I think he is like a really real second round pick. Like a very genuine second round pick.
Yeah.
Someone asked, what was Derek White's skill? Derek White was like an all defense level player in college and knocked down 40% from three and shot 50% from the field and was a really good decision maker. Like it's just like a totally different ball game with Derek White and Amari Bailey. Like
White was good at everything. He might not have been great at anything offensively, but he was good at everything. Like for Bailey, it's flashes of mediocrity in everything this year on the offensive end.
Derek White, the better comp is like Kobe Buffkin, in my opinion.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Okay, Adam, I've kept you way too long. You have to go to bed. You have to go to work in the morning. Tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what's going on in your life.
Sam, you're never keeping me too long. This is a labor of love here. So I'm glad to be able to spend my Sunday evenings with you. Find all my work on my Twitter channel at @theboxandone_. That'll have links to YouTube, which is my channel there, Adam Spinella, or my Substack, theboxandone.substack.com. Written video scouting reports coming out over the next week or so. Going to give myself like a week to digest everything coming out of the combine, some of the rumors flying around, and then probably dive into an adjustment of my big board as well as maybe another mock. So give me another week to get on that here and slowly drown in the sorrows of what is the Boston Celtics. Yeah. So on my end, I'm going to write a combine thing on a lot on the combine for tomorrow. I will then be taking the week to essentially like try and finalize the draft guide. It's not going to get done over the course of the next week, but I'm going to try and like really lock in a majority of it as much as I can. So might only be 3 podcast episodes this week, especially when we start getting into like both of these series are 3-0 currently. And we might end up in a spot where there are no games like for a week here because the NBA final schedule is like set at the end of the day. So we will see what happens in terms of like the podcast and like when I will podcast again. At the very least, expect one Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning on the podcast feed. But that's the best I can give you right now. Tomorrow is a big draft guide day for me. Having said that, folks, it's been great to see you all. Until next time, we will talk soon.